In the frozen mountains of Montana, where winter moves like a silent giant and snow buries every forgotten path, a man once known for courage has been living in the shadows of his own past. His name is Luke Arden, and the world believes his story ended the night an explosion stole his strength and his loyal K9 disappeared into the storm. But sometimes the mountains keep secrets, and sometimes fate brings back what we thought was lost forever. Before we begin this journey of loyalty healing and the miracles that live in the bond between a man and his dog, tell me where you were watching from. I would love to hear how far this story travels across the world. Winter had swallowed Silver Creek whole. This small Montana mountain town, tucked between granite slopes and forests the color of deep pine, lay under a thick armor of white. Snow drifted across rooftops like forgotten prayers, and wind carved lonely songs through the narrow valley. Every breath in Silver Creek felt like it hung suspended in the frigid air, too cold to fall, too heavy to rise. Along the foothills where the land began climbing, toward the jagged shoulders of Sterling Ridge sat a cabin built from weathered cedar, its chimney always breathing faint curls of gray. This was the home of Luke Arden, once the pride of the Silver Creek Police Department. He had been a tall man, broad-shouldered, the kind who once filled a doorway with quiet authority. His hair, once dark, had grown peppered with strands of silver too early for his age. His face carried the kind of rugged kindness found only in people who had served more than they could speak about. But the explosion 4 years ago had changed everything. The blast had left him wheelchair-bound, the lower half of his body unresponsive, and had stolen the partner who mattered most. Knight, his K9 companion, a German shepherd he trusted with his life. That loss carved something hollow in him, the kind of silence that settles beneath the bones. Luke had grown gentler since the accident, quieter, as if every word had to be earned. The townsfolk still respected him, but respect could not warm a house in winter, nor could it mend the ache of being forgotten by one's own purpose. His therapist, a woman who believed in stubborn hope, insisted he needed companionship, preferably a dog. Something to anchor you, she had said. Something that still believes in you. Luke never argued, but he hadn't believed he deserved such faith. Yet, on this particular morning, wrapped in layers of wool and loss, he pushed his wheels through the thick blanket of snow outside his cabin, loading himself into his aging Jeep, adapted with hand controls. He guided the vehicle along Winterbridge Road toward the rescue center at the opposite end of town, Snowhaven Animal Shelter. Snowhaven stood near the tree line, a humble structure warmed by bright lights and the energy of volunteers who wore compassion the way others wore scarves. The moment Luke entered, the smell of antiseptic and faint dog fur greeted him like old memories tugging at the edge of thought. The reception area was manned by Emily Ward, the manager of the center. She was in her early 30s, a woman with cinnamon brown hair tied in a loose ponytail and warm eyes framed behind oval glasses. Emily had a soft, earnest face, the sort that made frightened animals relax and made humans feel their sadness was safe with her. She wore chunky sweaters and jeans perpetually dusted with dog hair. Years earlier, a rescue dog she loved dearly had passed in her arms during a storm. That quiet heartbreak shaped her into a person who refused to let another animal die alone. Her kindness was not loud. It was persistent, patient, and stubborn in the way winter pines refused to bow, even under heavy snow. "Luke," Emily greeted, surprise softening her tone. "I didn't think you'd come in weather like this." "I figured it was time," he answered, voice steady but subdued. "Thought I'd look at the dogs you mentioned." Her smile warmed the cold room. "We've got a few newcomers, some seniors too. Let me show you." She guided him through the hallway toward the kennels, the air filled with the muffled whimpers, barks, and shuffling paws of animals who carried their own quiet histories. The first dogs he saw bounded toward him full of energy, pit mixes with eyes full of hope, a red heeler who wagged so hard she hit the kennel walls, a sleepy old beagle curled like a forgotten scarf. But Luke felt no spark, no sign, no pull, until they reached the farthest enclosure, half-shadowed beneath a flickering light. Inside lay a German shepherd, older, ribs faintly visible beneath his coat. His fur was a mix of sable and ash, the colors muted as if winter had drained the life from them. The dog lay curled in the corner, trembling ever so slightly. His ears flattened at the sound of footsteps, his eyes narrowing. Not aggression, only fear. But it wasn't the fear that stopped Luke cold. It was the amber-hued eyes, eyes that looked like molten gold caught beneath ice, eyes he had memorized through years of partnership, eyes that haunted him every night after the explosion. His breath caught. Who is that? We call him Ash, Emily replied. Found wandering the forest about 4 months ago. A hunter kept him safe for a while, said he seemed lost, confused, like he was searching for someone who never showed. When the dog grew weaker, he brought him here. Luke wheeled closer until the front of his chair touched the bars of the kennel. Ash lifted his head toward him, ears twitching, a spark of recognition flickering in the depths of those amber eyes, like a match struggling to ignite. Emily continued. He doesn't trust people, barely eats unless no one's watching, doesn't interact with the others. We think he has trauma, but he's gentle, just scared. What's his age? Luke asked, heart beating unevenly. About 8 or 9, hard to tell. He looks older than he should, like life was harsher than his body could bear. It was too much, too familiar, too impossible. Luke swallowed hard. Could I try something? Emily nodded silently. Luke slowly leaned forward, lowering his voice to a tone he hadn't used in years, a tone threaded with memories and command. Night, sit. The shepherd froze, not in fear, but in recognition so deep it felt mythic. Then, trembling, Ash pushed himself up on unsteady legs. He took one slow step, then another, sniffing the air as if confirming an impossible truth. His body lowered with precision, his hindquarters tucked, his spine straightened. He sat, perfectly, flawlessly, as only a trained K9 would. Emily's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with shock. Luke, no, that can't be. But Luke already knew. He felt it the way one recognizes a long-lost voice in a dream, the way the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. Every scar in his body seemed to thrum with certainty. His voice cracked like thin ice. Ash is Night. The dog, Night, took one final step forward until his nose pressed gently to the bars, a fragile gesture of faith from a soul that had wandered too long. Luke's hand trembled as he reached through the cold metal, resting his palm against Night's fur. And for the first time in years, warmth bloomed in that hollow space beneath his ribs. Outside, the snow continued falling, soft and endless, as if winter itself bowed in recognition of a reunion, long delayed but never forgotten. Morning crept slowly over Silver Creek, spilling pale ribbons of light across the snow-laden world. The sky carried that soft, silver-blue glow unique to deep winter, as if dawn were whispering rather than rising. The storm clouds from the night before had drifted toward the high ridges, leaving behind air so cold that every breath sparkled faintly as it left the lips. Inside Snowhaven Animal Shelter, warmth pooled from heating lamps and coffee steam, battling the cold that pressed against the windows. Emily Ward had arrived early, brushing stray dog fur off her thick-knitted cardigan as she checked the overnight logs. She hummed softly, a habit she kept to calm anxious animals, and the building responded in gentle rustles, tails tapping, soft whines. Yet beneath the steady morning rhythm, something had changed in the air. Night, once Ash, had slept for the first time in months without trembling. Emily had found him curled with his head resting on the blanket Luke had placed beside the kennel door before leaving. A quiet peace radiated from him, in a way she had never seen. At precisely 9, the front door swung open to reveal Luke Arden, wrapped in a heavy charcoal coat, gloved hands gripping the wheels of his chair. Frost clung to the edges of his beard, making him appear almost carved from winter itself. But his eyes, those steady, storm-tempered eyes, held an ember of something long dormant. Hope. "Morning, Luke," Emily greeted, voice soft but laced with curiosity. "I'm guessing you didn't sleep." He shook his head. "Didn't want to. Was afraid I'd wake up and realize yesterday was just a memory pretending to be real." Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "He's still here, and he remembers you." They moved to the kennel room, where Night waited, no longer pressed against the far corner. When Luke entered, Night rose immediately, tail lifting in a hesitant, almost reverent wag. He walked forward, not with the boldness of a working K9, but with the fragile gratitude of a soul who had wandered too far and finally found harbor. Emily watched the reunion in silence, She had seen many rescue animals reconnect with former families, but this felt different, mythic even, as if winter itself had stitched two halves of a story back together. When she finally spoke, her voice held a careful weight. "Luke, I need to tell you what we know about him." Luke nodded, his hand resting on Knight's head, fingers brushing the worn fur between the dog's ears. Emily folded her arms, gathering her thoughts. Knight, Ash, was found alone in the forest just before a massive blizzard hit. A hunter named Paul Whiteley spotted him limping near the old timber road. Paul's not the kind of guy who likes people much. Older, gruff, spends most of his time in a cabin miles from anyone. But he's got a soft spot for strays. He kept Knight for a few weeks, gave him food, a roof, tried to earn his trust. Knight pressed closer against Luke's knee, as if listening. "But Paul said Knight acted like he was waiting," Emily continued, "waiting for someone who wasn't coming. He'd stare at the tree line for hours, then wander into storms like he didn't care what happened to him. Eventually, Paul got worried. Knight was growing weaker, skipping meals, barely sleeping. So, he brought him here." Her gaze dropped briefly. "We considered him a special case, older, traumatized. He refused contact and flinched at loud sounds, but he never showed aggression. Just sadness." Luke felt the sentence land deep in his chest. "He was alone for 4 years, he whispered, voice cracking despite his effort. 4 winters. Emily stepped closer, her tone both gentle and firm. "Luke, take him home. He doesn't need another night here." Paperwork was quick, a signature, a confirmation, a quiet exchange of gratitude. Emily bent down to Knight, giving him a final scratch under the chin. "You found your way back once," she murmured. "Now go where you belong." Outside, the town shimmered beneath morning frost. Luke guided his jeep to the curb, wheelchair secured in the back. Knight hopped into the passenger side, with surprising elegance for his age, muscle memory of years spent leaping into patrol vehicles flickering through his movement. As Luke drove home, Knight sat pressed close, occasionally glancing at Luke as if checking whether this was real. Silver Creek greeted them like a painting brushed in winter light, chimneys smoking, evergreen branches bowing under frozen weight, the distant hum of snowplows scraping the streets. Luke's cabin appeared through the trees, framed by icicles that glittered like shards of fallen stars. The moment Luke opened the door, Knight paused at the threshold, nose lifting, ears twitching. He stepped inside slowly, absorbing every scent, the cedar walls, the faint aroma of pine logs from last night's fire, Luke's familiar presence woven into the air like an invisible thread of memory. Luke watched him with a tender ache. "Welcome home, partner." Knight walked a full circle around the living room, examining corners as if mapping the space. A soldier returning to an old battlefield, but this time safe. His movements were slower, a little stiff, but steady. When he finally settled near the hearth, laying his head on his paws, Luke felt the cabin breathe differently, fuller, warmer, less hollow. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Luke rolled over and opened it to find Nora Harper, his neighbor, bundled in a red scarf. Nora was in her mid-30s, a woman with soft features and bright, earnest eyes that tried to mask old sorrow. Her hair, a chestnut wave, was tied loosely beneath a knitted beanie. She had once worked as a school librarian before becoming a full-time caregiver for her son. Her kindness wasn't loud. It was woven into small gestures, the warm bread she left on Luke's porch every Thursday, the way she checked on him after storms, the gentle patience shaped by the loss of her husband 2 years earlier in a workplace accident. That pain had made her quieter, but not colder. Beside her stood Finn, 8 years old, small for his age with a mop of sandy blonde hair, and cheeks always flushed from either cold or excitement. Finn was sensitive, curious, and carried a shy warmth that made him cling to animals more easily than to people. Losing his father had made him retreat into silence for a while, but dogs, especially strays, pulled him out gently, like sunlight coaxing sprouts through frozen soil. "Morning, Luke," Finn greeted with a bright spark that surprised Luke. "Mom said a new dog came home with you." Nora smiled apologetically. "We don't want to intrude," but Finn was, well, buzzing. Luke chuckled. "Come on in, as long as he doesn't mind an old dog who's been through a lot." Finn's eyes widened when he spotted Knight lying by the fire. "He's beautiful," the boy whispered, moving slowly so he wouldn't frighten the dog. Knight lifted his head, ears tilting. Finn extended a small hand, not too close, but close enough for Knight to sniff. Knight hesitated, then nudged his nose gently against Finn's fingers. Luke blinked, astonished. He usually needs time with strangers. Nora touched Luke's arm lightly, smiling with that quiet depth of a person who had learned to read emotions through tiny gestures. Finn has a way with animals. Maybe they sense his softness. Finn settled beside Knight on the rug, small hand resting carefully on the dog's back. Knight's tail tapped once, then twice, a slow, cautious wag that seemed to say, "This one is safe." Luke watched the two of them, with a strange warmth filling his chest. Not just pride, not just nostalgia. Something softer. Something healing. Later, after Nora and Finn returned home, the cabin felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Knight dozed peacefully, occasionally lifting his head at a creak or gust of wind. A soldier's instincts never fully gone. Luke gathered blankets and began preparing a spot for Knight near his bed. But as he worked, he kept glancing toward the hearth. Knight, who once survived storms alone, now slept with the comfort of knowing someone watched over him. Luke whispered into the quiet room, the words soft as falling snow. "We'll figure this out. Together." Outside, winter pressed against the mountains, but inside the cabin, something long frozen had begun to thaw. The third morning since Knight's return arrived with a sky pale as frosted glass, the kind of dawn where the world seemed hesitant to wake. Silver Creek was still caught in the grip of deep winter. Snow draped over rooftops like layers of quiet, and smoke curled from chimneys in thin, wavering lines. The mountains behind the town, Sterling Ridge's rugged silhouette, stood cloaked in white, like patient giants watching over the valley. Inside, Luke Arden's cabin, warmth pulsed from the crackling fireplace. The scent of pine logs mingled with the faint aroma of coffee. Knight lay curled near the hearth, his breathing slow and deep, paws twitching softly as if chasing memories. Luke had been awake since before sunrise. A blanket draped across his lap, he rolled his wheelchair near the window and watched dawn creep over the trees. Something inside him, something once believed buried under rubble and regret, was beginning to move again. Knight stirred at the soft scrape of Luke's wheels. His ears twitched, then he blinked awake, lifting his head with a slow, dignified motion that showed the age in his bones, but also the loyalty burning steady beneath it. Luke smiled. "Morning, partner." Knight answered by patting over, pressing his head against Luke's knee. It was gentle, reverent, as if checking that the man he'd found wasn't a dream conjured by long, lonely winters. Luke reached down, sliding his fingers into the fur between Knight's ears. "We'll take it slow today, no pressure." But slow was a relative word for a former K9. After breakfast, and after Knight swept the kitchen with hopeful eyes, hoping for crumbs dropped accidentally on purpose, they began reintroducing training. Not formal sessions, not drills, simply pieces of routine stitched back into their shared life. Luke wheeled himself into the living room and tapped once on the hardwood floor. "Heel!" For a moment, Knight hesitated. Then instinct took over. He circled Luke's chair, aligning perfectly on the left side, sitting upright with precise posture. Luke let out a breath that was half relief, half awe. Still got it. Training continued with simple commands. Sit, stay, come, down. Knight remembered everything, though his movements were stiffer, his joints creaking like old floorboards. Luke kept the commands gentle, breaking each session with pats, quiet praise, and pauses to let Knight rest. The dog's eyes shone with something deeper than obedience, gratitude, love, recognition. But not everything was seamless. A gust of wind slammed a loose shutter against the house. The sudden bang echoed sharply. Knight jolted, scrambling backward, nails scraping wood. His body trembled, muscles tight, tail tucked. Luke froze, instincts rising. Not the instincts of a cop anymore, but of someone protecting a wounded friend. "It's okay," he murmured, voice low and steady. "You're safe here." It took almost a full minute for Knight's breathing to even out. When he finally stepped close again, his nose pressed against Luke's arm in a quiet plea for reassurance. Luke stroked his head. You've been through storms I can't imagine, haven't you? Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside the cabin, human and dog settled into a rhythm, old yet new, like picking up a melody remembered from childhood. Later that afternoon, Luke heard giggles outside, the unmistakable sound of Finn Harper, his young neighbor. Luke turned his chair toward the door just as it swung open. Nora Harper stepped in first. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and a knitted mustard-yellow scarf wrapped around her neck. She carried a casserole dish, warmth still rising from the foil covering. Finn followed at her heels, holding a small bag of dog treats decorated with cartoon bones. "Thought we'd bring you dinner," Nora said, brushing snow from her sleeves. "Weather's getting harsher again. Figured you might not feel like driving out." Luke started to protest, but she raised one eyebrow, her gentle way of saying, "Don't argue with a Harper." Knight trotted forward the moment Finn entered. The boy grinned, crouching down, letting Knight sniff the bag. "We brought snacks for him, too." Knight nudged Finn's arm, tail sweeping the air in slow, happy arcs. "I think he likes you," Luke observed. Finn beamed, cheeks bright. "Do you think maybe I could help train him? Just little things?" Luke hesitated, but Knight had already sat down beside Finn, calm and open. "Looks like he chose you," Luke said softly. "As long as it's gentle. He's been through a lot." As Nora set the casserole on the counter, she watched the scene with a softness in her gaze. "Finn hasn't connected like this with a dog in years," she whispered. "Thank you." Luke shook his head. "Knight's doing the healing, not me." For the next hour, Finn practiced basic commands with Knight. Short sessions, small victories, and plenty of treats. Knight responded to Finn with surprising ease, as though the boy's quiet kindness soothed wounds Luke couldn't reach. Nora sat beside Luke near the hearth, sipping cocoa Luke had insisted she take. "He seems brighter," she murmured. "Knight, I mean." "He is," Luke answered. "He reacts to noises sometimes, storms, sudden sounds. But otherwise, he's still in there, the dog I knew." Nora glanced at him, her eyes soft but steady. "And you seem brighter, too." Luke paused, caught off guard. "Do I?" "Just a little," she teased gently. "Like someone opened the curtains and let some sun in." He didn't argue. There wasn't much to say. Knight had returned not only to his home, but to his heart. After Finn and Nora left, with Finn promising to come back tomorrow and every day after, the cabin felt full rather than empty. Knight curled, near the fire again, eyes half closed, but watching Luke with that quiet devotion only a dog could give. Luke positioned his wheelchair closer, letting the warmth of the fire wash over him. He studied Knight's profile, the graying fur, the human-like wisdom in his eyes, the faint scars that told stories Luke could only guess. He whispered to the room, "I lost so much that day. I thought I lost you too." Knight lifted his head, resting it on Luke's knee. Luke stroked his fur, slow and grateful. "Thank you for finding your way back." Outside, the wind carried the hush of snow against the windows. Inside, warmth and memory wove themselves into something like healing. Luke felt it for the first time in years. His home wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was alive. It was shared. It was whole. Knight let out a deep sigh, the kind only dogs make when they feel safe, then drifted into sleep. And there, in the heart of winter, two souls, one human, one canine, continued learning how to live again. Silver Creek had known many winters, but none as restless as the one that arrived that night. Clouds thick as stone rolled over the valley, swallowing the sky in a bruised shade of purple. The air tasted metallic, the way it did before a storm that meant to test the spine of every living thing. Pines bowed under the pressure of a creeping wind that sighed through their branches like ancient spirits making warnings. Inside Luke Arden's cabin, firelight pulsed steadily, offering a fragile warmth against the cold pressing in. The logs crackled with stubborn defiance. Knight lay stretched beside the hearth, eyes half closed, ears twitching at every distant rumble. Even in rest, the old German shepherd remained a silent sentinel. Luke sat near the wood table, his wheelchair angled toward the room's warmest corner. Papers lay scattered in front of him, clinic notes, breathing exercises, medication reminders. He had grown used to organizing his life around medical rhythms, but tonight his chest felt tight in a way he recognized too well. Not pain, not panic. A whisper of the breathing trouble he'd carried since the explosion. He placed a hand over his ribs, massaging gently. Just cold air, he muttered to himself, trying to keep his tone light. Nothing dramatic. Knight lifted his head, amber eyes narrowing with concern. I'm fine, Luke reassured him, even though he wasn't convinced. Outside, the first true roar of the storm slammed against the walls. Snow whipped sideways, clinging to the window like frantic white brushstrokes. The wind shrieked through the cracks with a voice so sharp it made the house tremble. The lights flickered once, twice. Then darkness swallowed the cabin whole. The fire remained, a flickering island of orange in a sea of shadow. But the sudden loss of electricity made the air drop sharply. Luke's breath came shorter, tighter, his lungs struggling against the cold that seeped through the walls. He reached for his inhaler on the table, finding it by memory, fingers closing around it like a lifeline. One spray, a little relief, but the device felt alarmingly light. Almost empty, he whispered. Knight rose immediately, muscles stiff but alert, paws padding across the wooden floor. He pressed his head against Luke's knee, issuing a soft whine. Yeah, Luke admitted quietly. This might get bad. The storm howled again, long, hollow, eerie. A shutter slammed outside. Somewhere on the porch, the wind tore at loose boards, rattling them like bones. Knight stiffened. Another slam, a louder one. Then the unmistakable sound of something metal shifting, then giving way. The cabin door. Earlier that afternoon, Luke had noticed the latch sticking. He'd meant to fix it. He hadn't. A violent gust blasted the door inward. Snow exploded into the entryway. The wind surged through the house, killing the warmth instantly. Luke jerked from the cold shock, his breathing seizing. In his chest. Knight reacted before Luke could even speak. The dog lunged toward the door, bracing his body against it, but the storm was too strong. It kept pushing. Wind whipped Knight's fur sideways. Snowflakes clung to his whiskers. Luke struggled to wheel himself forward, but his breath faltered, shallow, uneven. Knight, don't, just leave it, come here. But Knight didn't move away. Instead, he turned his head, eyes locking onto Luke with a clarity sharp as a command spoken aloud. Something's wrong. You need help. I can get it. He nudged the door open with his shoulder. Knight! Luke tried to shout, but the word fractured in his throat. The dog disappeared into the blizzard. Out in Silver Creek, the storm tore across the neighborhood with such ferocity that even the streetlights flickered like dying lanterns. Snow buried the porch steps in seconds. The world became a swirling white maze, featureless, shapeless, blinding. Knight pushed through it. He lowered his head against the wind, each step deliberate but driven by instinct, older than language. The scent of pine mixed with frost, yet beneath it all, he followed something warmer, something familiar. Nora Harper's home. During their recent visits, Knight had memorized the smell, a blend of bread dough, gentle soap, and childhood laughter. Finn's mittens, always flecked with paint. Nora's cinnamon-scented candles. Knight carved his way through the snow, paws sinking deep, but he never faltered. Even storms had rules, and loyal hearts knew how to break through them. By the time he reached Nora's porch, he was coated in frost. His fur looked dusted with diamonds. He barked, short, urgent bursts, then pawed at the wooden door. Inside, Finn was drawing at the kitchen table when he heard the noise. Mom, Knight's here. Nora rushed to the window, confusion tightening her expression. When she saw Knight shivering outside, barking toward the direction of Luke's cabin, her face paled. That's not normal, she whispered. Something's wrong. She threw on her coat, grabbed Finn's hand, and opened the door. Snow blasted into them with icy teeth. Knight barked again, retreating a step toward Luke's cabin, glancing back as though urging them to follow. Luke, Nora breathed. He's in trouble. She wrapped her scarf tighter, lifted Finn onto her hip to shield him from the wind, and followed Knight into the storm. The journey back felt endless. The wind pushed like a living creature. Snow stung their cheeks, but Knight stayed just ahead, guiding them with unwavering determination. When they reached Luke's cabin, the front door hung half open, snow piling into the entryway. Nora's heart seized. Luke! Finn clung to her jacket. Knight rushed inside first, barking sharply. Luke was conscious but slumped against his chair, hands shaking, breath shallow. Easy, sore. Inhaler lay on the floor, nearly empty. His skin was pale, eyes dazed from lack of oxygen and cold. "Oh God," Nora whispered, tearing off her gloves. She moved beside him, steady hands finding his shoulders. "Luke, stay with me. Breathe slow. I've got you." Her voice, warm and commanding, cut through the storm's roar. Knight pressed his body against Luke's leg, anchoring him. "Nora," Luke rasped, had a flare-up. Air's too cold." "You don't talk," she said firmly. "Just breathe. I'm calling for help." She pulled out her phone. Miraculously, she had weak signal. Miraculously, someone answered. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, distant sirens pierced the storm. Emergency responders reached the cabin, lifting Luke onto a stretcher with practiced care. Before they carried him outside, Luke reached out, fingers trembling, searching until they found Knight's fur. His voice was barely a whisper, but every word carried gratitude heavy enough to tip the world. "You're still my Knight. Thank you for finding your way home." Knight lowered his muzzle, pressing it into his palm, a vow spoken without sound. Then they took Luke into the waiting ambulance, red lights reflecting in the swirling snow. Knight watched until the vehicle disappeared beyond the ridge. Winter did not loosen its grip on Silver Creek after the storm. Instead, it settled deeper, heavier, as if the valley had been chosen as the season's final resting place. Snow buried the sidewalks in soft dunes, and the world moved in slow motion, each breath forming a cloud, each step sinking into quiet. Luke Arden returned home from the hospital 2 days after the incident. He looked tired but steadier, wrapped in layers of blankets Nora insisted he take. Knight met him at the door, tail sweeping low and slow. Not the wild wag of a puppy, but the dignified greeting of a guardian, relieved to see his charge alive. "Easy, boy," Luke murmured as Knight pressed his head against his chest. "I'm all right, thanks to you." The cabin warmed quickly once the fire was lit. Knight stayed close to Luke's chair, resting his chin on the armrest whenever he could, as though keeping him within physical reach was necessary for peace. Nora and Finn visited frequently that week, bringing soup, stories, and the quiet companionship only neighbors with shared hardship could offer. Finn always sat cross-legged on the rug near Knight, drawing pictures of snowy mountains, patrol dogs, and sometimes a stick figure version of Luke with a cape. "It's you," Finn explained proudly once, pointing at the cape. "You're a hero." Luke chuckled. "I think you got the wrong guy." "No," Finn said earnestly. "Knight's the hero, but heroes always come in pairs." Knight chuffed softly, as if agreeing. The next event unfolded on a morning so still the world appeared carved from ice. Luke was sipping coffee near the window when he noticed Finn sprinting across the snowy yard, jacket half-zipped, breath puffing like tiny steam engines. "Luke!" Finn burst in, barely pausing to knock. "There's something weird happening near the Old Town storage building. I heard noises, like someone dropping metal stuff." Knight lifted his head instantly, ears high, eyes sharp. Luke's instincts stirred. "Slow down." "What kind of noise?" "I don't know," but Knight heard it too. Finn pointed at the dog, who was now standing, alert, body angled toward the direction of the storage building. "He started pacing and whining before I came here." Knight took a step toward the door, glancing back at Luke and tugging lightly at his sleeve, urging him in the same way he had done before the storm. Luke's breath tightened, not in fear, but in recognition of the same instinct that once guided them on patrol. "Okay," he said, voice steadying. "This isn't nothing." He reached for his phone and dialed Officer Travis Boone. Travis Boone was one of the youngest officers in Silver Creek, but he carried himself with a balanced mix of humility and determination. In his late 20s, tall, with sandy brown hair often hidden beneath a knitted beanie, he had the earnestness of someone who still believed deeply in justice. His hazel eyes held a spark of alertness, a trait that had made him an excellent trainee under Luke years ago, back when Luke's legs still carried him across icy streets and dark alleys. Travis arrived within minutes, breath misting as he jogged up the porch steps. "Luke! Finn! What's going on?" Luke explained quickly. Knight paced beside him, nails tapping anxiously on the wooden floor. Travis crouched to Knight's level. "You picking something up, old boy?" His voice softened as he scratched Knight's shoulder. "Show me." Knight trotted toward the door and barked once, a sharp, urgent sound. "That's a working dog alert," Travis said immediately, standing straighter. "Let's move." Luke couldn't join on foot, but he knew the storage yard well. A cluster of old maintenance buildings behind the grocery store, used mostly for equipment no one wanted but refused to throw away. His stomach tightened with old police instincts. "Be careful," Luke warned. "Knight's not going to react like this unless something's there." Travis nodded. "He's leading." The snow crunched beneath Knight's paws as he guided them through the alley behind the store. The world was silent, except for the whisper of wind brushing against corrugated metal roofs. Halfway across the lot, Knight halted, his body tensed. He lowered his head and released a single growl, quiet but unmistakable. Travis froze. "Where?" Knight lifted his nose, stepped forward, then barked toward a narrow gap beside the storage shed. A place small enough for a person to squeeze into. Travis drew closer cautiously. A rustling sound, a muffled thump, then the shape of a man trying to hide behind a stack of old crates. "Silver Creek Police!" Travis called. "Come out slowly." The man bolted. Travis lunged after him, boots skidding on ice. Knight surged forward, barking with explosive authority, not attacking, only tracking, guiding the chase like in his working days. The fleeing man stumbled, slipping on packed snow, and Travis managed to catch him with a careful, controlled tackle that avoided injury. Within minutes, the situation was secure. The thief, a local drifter known for breaking into sheds for food or old tools, was handcuffed and grumbling as Travis led him toward the patrol truck. "Honestly," Travis muttered, shaking his head, "he should have known better than to run from a retired K-9. Knight sat proudly beside Luke's chair, chest rising with steady breaths, eyes bright with the thrill of purpose rekindled. "You still got it in you," Luke murmured, scratching Knight's neck. "Guess some instincts don't fade." News traveled faster than winter wind in Silver Creek. By the next day, Knight had become the town's unofficial legend. Children at Finn's school created a poster with glittered letters, "Knight, Winter Hero of Silver Creek." Finn wrote an essay titled, "The Bravest Dog I Know." Teachers cried, parents clapped. The principal asked Luke for a photo of Knight to hang in the main hallway. Knight did not understand fame. He still preferred lying near the fire, resting his chin on Luke's knee, or following Finn around the yard like a weathered guardian rediscovering childhood. But Silver Creek understood. The town had endured a harsh winter, storms, loneliness, and long nights. Knight's actions stitched something warm through the community, hope. People waved when Luke wheeled into town. Shop owners left dog treats wrapped in napkins on their counters. Strangers approached to thank Knight personally, though they often did it from a polite distance, respecting his quiet dignity. Knight accepted it all with calm composure, but his loyalty never wavered. His eyes always drifted back to Luke, his true anchor, his center of gravity. And for Luke, something deep within him shifted. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a broken piece of who he once was. He felt like someone returning, someone who still mattered, someone who had a place in the world again, thanks to the dog who had survived storms of his own. Winter did not leave Silver Creek all at once. It loosened its grasp slowly, the way an old friend lingers in the doorway before finally stepping out. Snow melted in hesitant patches, revealing earth beneath like shy glimpses of color returning to a monochrome world. Birds began to test their voices again. Icicles dripped steadily from rooftops, as if the mountains themselves were learning how to breathe in warmth after months of silent frost. Luke Arden watched the changing season from his cabin porch, wrapped in a quilt Nora had sewn from scraps of old fabric. The air was still cold, but not the dangerous kind. This cold carried a promise, a hint of beginnings. Knight lay at his feet, chin resting on Luke's boot. His fur shimmered in the weak morning sun. The old German shepherd looked stronger now, his eyes brighter, gait steadier. The long winter had taken much from him, but it had given something back too. Belonging. Luke reached down and rubbed Knight's head. "Hard to believe," he murmured. that a few months ago you were lost out there in the snow." Knight responded with a soft huff, the kind that sounded suspiciously like he found Luke's sentiment too obvious to bother answering. "All right," Luke laughed gently. "Point taken." In the distance, the town square shimmered with early spring activity. Colorful banners fluttered above the street, and people bundled in the last of their winter coats moved about with anticipation. Today was special, not just for the town, but for Knight. Snowhaven Animal Shelter had announced a small ceremony to honor him. Guardian of Silver Creek. A simple title, but in a town carved from storms and quiet resilience, the words meant more than medals ever could. The ceremony took place beneath a large spruce tree near the shelter, one of the first trees to shake off its frost. The townspeople gathered slowly, children tugging at mittens, elders leaning on canes, young families smiling at the German shepherd who had become a symbol of hope. Emily Ward stood near a small wooden podium, her cinnamon-brown hair tucked behind her ear, sweater still covered in dog fur despite her best efforts. She looked equal parts proud and emotional. When Luke arrived, Nora pushed his wheelchair through the softening snow, while Finn carried a small velvet pouch with the medal inside. Knight trotted beside them, with the calm dignity of an old soldier who didn't need fanfare but accepted it graciously. "Luke, you made it," Emily greeted warmly. "We weren't starting without you." "I wouldn't miss this," Luke said, eyes shining with quiet pride. "He deserves every bit of it." Knight sat neatly beside him, tail sweeping the ground in slow, content arcs. Emily cleared her throat and addressed the small crowd. "Thank you all for coming. Today we honor a dog who survived against the odds, who protected one of our own, who helped our officers keep this community safe, and who reminded us all of something we forget far too easily, that loyalty doesn't fade with time." Knight lifted his head, as if listening attentively. Emily nodded to Finn. "And now, the person Knight chose as his youngest friend will present the medal." Finn stepped forward. His cheeks were pink with excitement and nerves. Nora stood behind him, hands on his shoulders for support. He opened the velvet pouch with great seriousness, the way a child opens a treasure chest. Inside lay a simple bronze medallion, engraved with the words, "Guardian of Silver Creek." Finn knelt in front of Knight, eyes wide with admiration. "Knight, you're the bravest dog I've ever met, and you helped save my friend." Luke felt his throat tighten, but he didn't speak. The moment belonged to Knight. Finn fastened the medal gently around Knight's neck. The German shepherd leaned forward and pressed his forehead against the boy's chest. A gesture so tender, it made the crowd collectively exhale. Applause rose like a soft wave. Knight's tail wagged once, proud and humble all at once. Spring days in Silver Creek unfolded slowly, each one warmer than the last. With each thaw, Luke found himself rediscovering pieces of his life he thought were gone. Strength, purpose, even a hesitant sense of joy. It was during one of those days, with melting snow trickling down the driveway, that Luke made his decision. He rolled his chair to the center of the yard, where Emily, Nora, and Finn had gathered with Knight. The dog sat between them like the bridge that had quietly linked their lives together. "I've been thinking," Luke began, hands resting on the wheels of his chair, "about what to do now that Knight's back, about what comes next." Emily tilted her head. "Whatever it is, we're listening." Luke looked at Knight, at the scars, the wisdom in his gaze, the resilience stitched into every part of him. There are a lot of dogs out there like him. Dogs who've been abandoned, mistreated, forgotten. Dogs who don't trust anymore, or who have survived things they shouldn't have. Knight nuzzled Luke's hand, as if urging him on. "I want to help them," Luke continued, "not as an officer, not in the way I used to, but maybe as someone who understands what it feels like to lose everything and still find a way back." Emily's eyes lit with understanding. "Luke, are you saying—" "I want to start a program at Snowhaven," he said. "Something like a New Trails Initiative, a place for dogs with trauma to regain trust, to learn they're safe again. Knight can help guide them. He's lived it. He's survived it." For a moment, the world stood still, as if even the melting snow paused to listen. Nora brought a hand to her mouth, emotions brightening her eyes. "Luke, that would change so many lives." Finn clapped his hands, jumping slightly. Night can teach them how to be brave again. Night barked once, the decisive, proud bark of a dog accepting a mission. Emily smiled, wiping the corner of her eye. We'll make it happen. In the weeks that followed, afternoons at Snowhaven became filled with new routines. Night acted as a quiet guide to dogs who trembled at every sound, who hid behind crates, who didn't know what human kindness felt like. He would approach them slowly, lay down beside them, share space without demanding anything in return, and somehow, mysteriously gently, they began to trust. Luke oversaw the sessions from his wheelchair, offering advice, encouragement, and a steady presence. Nora helped with paperwork and warm drinks for the volunteers. Finn made posters with titles like "Welcome to New Trails," covered in stickers and paw prints. The program grew not because it was advertised, but because healing has a way of calling to those who need it. One late spring afternoon, when the air carried the first whisper of summer, Luke sat on the porch while Night rested at his feet. Sunlight glimmered through the thinning branches, painting gold across the dog's fur. The valley below shimmered with green patches pushing up through the remnants of winter. Luke rubbed Night's favorite spot behind his ear. "You didn't just find your way home," he whispered. "You brought light back with you." Night lifted his head and nudged Luke's hand, eyes warm as early morning sun. And in that gentle, wordless moment, surrounded by thawing snow, soft wind, and the distant laughter of Nora and Finn, Luke realized something profound. Winter had taken many things from them, but spring was giving them back everything that mattered. In the quiet places of our lives, God often sends miracles that do not arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes they come through a loyal friend who returns when we least expect it, or through the kindness of a stranger who chooses compassion over fear. Luke and Night remind us that no winter lasts forever, and no heart is too broken for God to heal. In our daily lives, we may face storms that leave us tired and searching for direction, but if we keep faith, God will guide us through every valley. He will place people and moments on our path that lift us back to hope, just as he did for Luke and Night. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment to tell us what you believe in, and do not forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your family always. And if you feel the miracle in this story, type Amen in the comments.